Welcome back. This is Honor, Shame and the Gospel, Part 2. It's a three-part series based on a presentation given by my friend Colin Edwards. We're going to be thinking about how honor and shame operate in your particular context. Every culture has honor, every culture has shame. They're two different things. They're not just two ends of one spectrum. We're going to think about how they function. I heard a story of a team in Bangladesh that was mainly Westerners. And as part of their orientation, when they had new workers, they talked to them about honor and shame. And one time they had a worker join them who was Chinese. I think he was from Hong Kong. And he said, yeah, I know all this stuff. I grew up with honor and shame. I know how these things work. But he had a very unhappy time in Bangladesh. And when he left after 2 years, he says, I do not understand these people. These people do not make sense to me. And part of his problem was that the way honor was handled and understood, its importance was different in Bangladesh than from where he'd come from, and the same with shame. We all need to approach this from the perspective we need to learn. We need to learn how things operate in the culture where we are serving. What is honor? Honor is the esteem that you are held in, especially by other people. Honor is primarily about what other people think of you. We use words like dignity, glory, standing. These are things that are referred to frequently in the Old Testament, sought after and highly prized. But there's more than one kind of honor. There's more than one way of deserving honor. One area is honor as virtue. That is being an honorable person. People attribute honor to somebody because of their behavior, being good, being dutiful, being responsible, acting as honor requires. And so people maintain their own honor in terms of what they want people to think about them, and other people attribute honor to somebody according to their behavior. So that's one basis of somebody having honor. A second basis is power, or your standing in the community, your position, your rank, your status, being a chief, being a governor, being a member of parliament, being from a particular family. There are all these things which can confer honor on a person. How closely are these two held in your context? Do you see people who are virtuous but have no power? Do you see people who are honored for their power but actually despised for their character? Pause for a moment and think about that in your context. Do you recognize honor as virtue? Can you see examples of people being honored because of their position? And do people who have a position, do they also strive to be honorable? How does the interaction between these two work? The game of honor. Sometimes in a culture where honor is highly sought after, people are involved in a perpetual game, a competition. All their interactions involve an element of competition with other people rather than cooperation, with a view to winning, with a fear of losing, and maybe perhaps settling on a draw. But people are consciously competing with each other in what they say and what they do, in the way they dress. Do you observe games of honor going on? It's not a choice, it's something that people do as part of their normal life. Where you get games of honor, it's a zero-sum game. You can't share the winning. You either win or you lose. If so, if that is going on, what are the rules of the game where you are? Let me give you an example. There was a tourist, I think it was in Turkey, wanting to visit a historic site in an out-of-town place, and he got talking to a taxi driver and tried to haggle to get a good price. And they were discussing the price, and the tourist was trying to drive the price down. And another taxi driver standing nearby heard them and said, "I'll take you for that price." And the first taxi driver was really angry that the second one had cut in like that. So he immediately halved that amount that he had refused before. He halved the price the second taxi driver had accepted. "I'll take you for this much." And the second taxi driver pitched in again. And this went on, they were angry. And in the end, the first taxi driver said, "I will take you for nothing. You will be my guest. It will be my pleasure to take you to this place. For nothing, you come in my car." And the tourist was really bemused, puzzled what was going on. And he said to the Taxi driver, why? What's the point in you taking me if I don't give you anything? I win, he says. That's the point. I win. So in this particular case, the desire to win the contest with the other taxi driver was worth more than the money he would have received for taking the passenger at a normal price. That's quite an extreme example of people involved in a game of honor. So pause and think for a while about whether you see games of honor going on in your context, whether it's to do with words or actions or clothing or other things in which people are consciously competing with each other for status. We've already mentioned honor as virtue, honor as status, and how closely these may be held, whether they're held together. Are they completely separated? There's usually some degree of overlap. Let's go on to think about what the expected duties are, what counts towards being honorable. Usually hospitality is in there, that a hospitable person is a person who is honored. Generosity is another thing that people honor. And so sometimes people are generous to maintain their honorable status or to try and gain a more honorable status. Giving protection according to the power they have, protecting the weak, standing up for those that are vulnerable. And loyalty to their leaders, the people they look up to, and also loyalty to the people who serve them. And in many cultures, these things contribute to somebody having a virtuous status, a thing of honor. And the thing is, you don't get to choose these things. You don't get to decide in that culture what people are going to honor. And so thinking about this is important. Do they honor you? If you observe what it is they honor in others, you will know what is expected of you. What is godly honor? What is it that people look for in somebody within the culture such that they say that is a person of God, and they honor them for it? It may not be what we expect. It may not be something at all bad or unworthy, just a different way of approaching things. And it's important to understand those things because we are being evaluated all the time, and we want to present the gospel in such a way that makes the gospel attractive and doesn't associate it with dishonor. So pause for a few moments and think about those things in the culture in which you find yourself. Okay, let's start talking about shame. There's shame in the sense of discretion, and we'll also talk about shame as disgrace. Discretion shame is something that is valued. When people say that person has no shame, it's because they're missing something that is good and valuable. And things that are to do with discretion shame would include modesty, both in terms of how one dresses, because one has a sense of shame, one does not dress inappropriately. That's a positive trait. Knowing what the rules are and not transgressing them. In other words, doing the right thing, not going into the place where you should not be or saying the thing you should not say because you have a sense of shame. And it's a positive moral thing. It's not a negative thing. And that sense of, because I'm an honorable person, I will behave discreetly and not expose somebody else to scandal, protecting the vulnerable. There's that sense of an honorable person, because they have a sense of shame, doing the right thing. Discretion shame. You might like to pause for a moment and think about how discretion shame works in your context, the sort of shame which a person shouldn't be without. Disgrace shame is quite different. Disgrace shame is the sort of shame you desperately want to avoid. It is a bad thing that sticks to people. It's about being looked at. That's true of honor as well, but it's especially about being looked at and judged negatively. Shame is put on you, disgrace is put on you by others. It often involves feeling a break in relationship, feeling the fracture. People don't want to be associated with the person who's disgraced. In extremes, it can lead to alienation, that a person is completely cut off from others because of disgrace. If you find yourself in a situation of that kind of shame, your response is, may the ground open up and swallow me because I just want to get out of this. And you can generate a situation like that in any culture by saying the wrong thing really publicly, and everybody looks at you and think, how could you say that? that's disgrace shame. Or by being caught doing something you shouldn't be doing and you're seen and there's no escape. So these are the ways, the sort of case of disgrace shame, as opposed to the shame that keeps you out of trouble. It's being caught in shame, being exposed. Disgrace shame can come from many different things, not just from doing something wrong, from having a low status. Now, people of a low status, as assigned to them by the culture they're in, people of a low status are not ashamed amongst themselves, but then when they find themselves amongst people of a higher status, there's that consciousness of being the low status person in the midst of the high status. Similarly with low worth or low value, it's partly about being in the wrong place compared with others, and both the person of low status or low worth and the people around them are aware of this problem, that you shouldn't be there, you are out of place. Loss of status is a different thing. Loss of status occurs when somebody had the privileges of honor and then they do something and lose them and come down the scale. And that can happen in many different ways. A simple way might be in a classroom situation where somebody is getting very good marks and then they're found to be a cheat, and they go from being the admired top of the class to being disgraced and being shown to be a cheat and no longer respected. Or a bigger example, you have a landowning family who've been honored by the community. They've been seen as the nobles of that particular district, and many people have stories of how they appreciated them. And then comes the revolution and they're dispossessed. They no longer have their property. They no longer have any power. They are reduced to the same level as everybody else, and they're doing manual work, and they've had a loss of status, which may not even be their fault, but they are seen as people who have come down, and they carry a certain disgrace. There's the area of pollution, contagion, and dirtiness, where within a particular culture, because of the rules of that culture, one person or a group of people are regarded as polluting by another group, or contaminating, bringing a contagion. And it's about knowing your boundaries. But if you're outside of those boundaries, there's a problem. Dirtiness. I mean, one very simple example, very material example. You're on a long bus journey and somebody says to the driver, I really need to stop. I need to relieve myself. And the driver says, no, we're going to stop in half an hour. And you can't hold it in. And then you are ashamed, and everyone looks at you and everybody knows. And it's very embarrassing. It's acute because it's uncleanness in a place that should be clean. There's a disgrace to it, to be the person who has brought uncleanness into the vehicle. And there's all kinds of other examples, social examples, religious, ethnic, all kinds of different ways this can work, that shame comes on somebody because they have become a polluting influence. There's the whole issue of violating boundaries, that people know where they should be and where they shouldn't be. So when children go running into a meeting of the elders and, what are you doing here? Whose child are you? It brings shame on the person who has not managed their child. Or just another simple example, if a man walks into a ladies' toilet by accident, suddenly, oh, what are you doing in here? You shouldn't be here. It's a disgrace shame. And of course, there are much more serious ones where somebody is caught doing something they really shouldn't be doing, and they're exposed, whether that's immorality or corruption or whatever. And there's that thing of, I have violated a boundary and been seen to do so, and disgrace comes upon that person. Such shame is felt. It's felt deeply within the person, and there are different shame responses according to different cultures, different upbringing. So for some, it's a matter of humiliation. The person feels humiliated, embarrassed, dirty. Dirty is different to humiliated. Depressed, and the response may be to withdraw because they're depressed, or to be afraid of people, afraid of being noticed, or angry. Again, a different response, withdrawing and hiding, or being angry and perhaps expressing rage. You might get in an international competition. Somebody's caught on camera cheating. Now, they may be humiliated and withdraw and hide and avoid the cameras, or they may be defiant and angry and say, no, this is a trick of the camera. I did not do what you think I did. Now, these are two responses to the same circumstances, to the same situation. And it varies according to culture, sometimes personality, but primarily culture. So let's think about some shame questions. What types of shame are operating in your culture? As a general rule, men and women handle shame differently to each other, or societies handle shame differently as regards to men and women. Think about what brings shame on men where you are, what brings shame on women. What type of shame responses do you see? What do people do when they're disgraced? How do they respond? And really big question, how is shame dealt with in your culture? How are shame issues resolved? How are they addressed? Who deals with it? Is it for the person who's shamed to take the initiative? Is there somebody else whose job it is? And this is quite important as we go on to think about how honor and shame and the gospel interact with each other. So take some time to talk about those questions in relation to shame. And in part 3, we'll talk about shame, honor, and the gospel.